So next up, we have Jonathon Blazer on Serbia. All right.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Amazing. Is this thing on? Great. All right, I am going to be talking about the former Yugoslavia. So, Elizabeth, can I get that yellow Parenti filter? Do you guys have that here? No?
That's my job.
You can add that in post. Thanks, Peter. Amazing. And thank you so much, Jetta. That was amazingly interesting. And, you know, I love your message there about meddling, and I think that's going to be really important for what you're about to hear as well. So according to the White House website, President Joe Biden's upcoming Summit for Democracy, which he has invited 120 leaders from foreign countries to, it's co-sponsored by leaders from Costa Rica, Zambia, South Korea, and the Netherlands. According to the website, it promises to, among other things, and please, if you could just hold your laughter till the end of this list, promises to reaffirm, I'm doing the Parenti wrestling with the mic thing already, promises to reaffirm central role of democratic institutions in delivering prosperity and safeguarding liberty. Promises to support free and independent media. Promises to bolster democratic reformers and defend free and fair elections and inclusive political processes. Now, those are all great things. I like those things. I think we here at the Center for Political Innovation in general agree with those things. But, you know, I think with all politicians and their promises, it's important to approach with a healthy dose of skepticism. So what I'd like to do here is just have a brief look at Joe Biden's record on some of these issues with respect to the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. So in the early 90s, Biden was already a seasoned senator. He was serving on the Committee for Foreign Relations. He became a ranking minority member on that committee in 1997. As early as 1993, Biden was repeatedly calling for the use of force in Yugoslavia, lifting of the arms embargoes, sending airstrikes, and even deploying U.S. troops to attack Bosnian Serb forces. He, in fact, boasted, "I'm the first guy to call for airstrikes in Bosnia. I wrote that lift and strike policy," which meant lifting the arms embargo against the Bosnian forces and conducting U.S. airstrikes against Serbian positions. Biden asserted that the U.S. had a moral justification for intervening, even pressuring the comparatively soft-stanced Bill Clinton on these issues. In 1994, when Clinton vetoed a bill that would have lifted that arms embargo, Biden called the embargo illegal and immoral. So according to Joe Biden's democracy, it's illegal and immoral to uphold an international agreement to stop flooding a war zone with weapons. I'd say we're not off to a good start as far as reaffirming the role of democratic institutions in delivering prosperity and safeguarding liberty. In 1998, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, he was disturbed by what he saw as the repression of Albanians in Kosovo. But he warned that unilateral action by the US and NATO would constitute a violation of the UN Charter. Biden denounced the UN and scoffed at the notion that the US even needs the UN's approval to take action in this scenario. In October, Biden specifically said, "There's been no talk about the US interest here. It far exceeds the humanitarian interest." That's a direct quote. More direct quote. "If I were president, I would just bomb him. And I mean that sincerely." That's what critical reporters these days would call a classic Biden gaffe. You know, I would just bomb him. Now, Biden wasn't president, but you know, based on his tenure as the ranking minority member on the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, that's basically what President Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright and the NATO leaders did, was just bomb them. In 1994, Biden criticized the UN for imposing what he called idiotic rules of engagement that slowed the pace of NATO airstrikes. Idiotic rules of engagement. I'll remind you that in 2021, Biden's key policy, the one he ran on, Build Back Better, he called it. This key policy that was ostensibly supposed to benefit working class Americans, although I'm sure we could all criticize what was actually in the bill, it was completely derailed by a member of his own party, Joe Manchin. What did Joe Biden have to say about that? Were there idiotic rules of engagement? No, that's just politics in D.C. You know, even though it was a collection of watered-down half measures, the biggest line item in the bill, I think, was a huge tax giveaway to the rich. You know, Joe Biden couldn't see through it to even fight for that basic policy that was supposed to be the cornerstone of his campaign. Another promise of his campaign, the so-called $15 minimum wage, completely rent asunder by who? The unelected parliamentarian in the Senate. Some heretofore unknown, bureaucratic staffer just completely sidelined Joe Biden's, whole promise to the working class. This is not an idiotic rule of engagement. It's only idiotic when rules get in the way of bombing foreign countries. That's Joe Biden's democracy. Anyways, Joe somehow made do with the limited 20-day airstrike against the Bosnian Serbs until eventually the Dayton Accords were signed. The Dayton Peace Accords, drafted right here in the heartland of Ohio, and signed in Paris, France, the city of liberté, égalité, fraternité. Surely this was a chance for the U.S. to not only put an end to this terrible war, but show those backward Slavs what Western democracy was all about. So let's see what happened in Bosnia and the new Republika Srpska, which was sort of an enclave carved out for the ethnic Serbian population. So they ousted the democratically elected President Radovan Karadzic. Fair enough, he was an accused war criminal at the time. He was very popular there. We have many war criminal politicians here who are very popular, The new president, Biljana Plavšić, worked with Western authorities to purge the army of over 100 leaders who were unfriendly to capitalist restoration at the hands of the West. Go figure. They were more in favor of collectivist social programs like the ones enjoyed in the former Yugoslavia of the 60s and 70s. When the Western-backed Plavšić was unable to secure approval from the People's Assembly, she had it dissolved and pushed through the nomination of unpopular Milorad Dodik, who only had 2 seats in the Assembly. Now, this was denounced by the citizens of the Republic, but it was hailed by NATO's chief of operations in Bosnia, Carlos Westendorp. In fact, he was so supportive of the nomination that he invited NATO troops to surround the Interior Ministry and show their support as well. So this is the democracy that Biden and the West were promoting in the newly carved up Balkan countries. And, as horrifying as it probably seemed, it probably wasn't surprising to Bosnian Serb journalists who months before had noted that Dodik seemed to be under the direct control of the U.S. intelligence service and had already traveled abroad several times for consultations and direct instructions. Now, of course, speaking of journalists, freedom of the press, very important for a functioning democracy. That's why it's in our Second Amendment. It was written up in the new Bosnia's constitution as part of those Dayton Accords in Article 2, Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. It's mentioned on the website for the Summit for Democracy, support free and independent media. And yet, when the Bosnian Army's own progressive radio station, Radio Krajina, protested that removal of leftist leaders from the army, the radio station was shut down by NATO unilaterally. In fact, previously, in the NATO actions against Bosnia, TV transmitters were specifically targeted and 16 civilian journalists were killed. This is how Joe Biden and Western democracy is protecting independent journalism abroad. Biden even went so far as to say, I believe we should be using airstrikes much more aggressively. NATO Secretary General Javier Solana went so far as to say, NATO will not hesitate to use force against media networks or programs. Those are the words of the NATO Secretary General. This is their democracy. These efforts to enforce Western democracy continued into late 1998. Biden and the Clinton-Albright State Department were examining their options in Kosovo, and the aforementioned Biljana Plavšić, president of Republika Srpska, despite her initiative and enthusiasm, she was, unable to muster the necessary support from the populace. She couldn't quite get reelected. Instead, the people gave the vote to the challenger, Nikola Poplashin. Some might have called Nikola Poplashin a democratic reformer in the area. So surely he was bolstered by the NATO High Representative Carlos Westendorp at the backing of the West. No, he was not bolstered. What actually happened? Carlos Westendorp had Poplashin removed from office Furthermore, he collaborated with the OSCE to completely ban Popular's Serbian Radical Party from participating in any elections as of April 2000. Are we defending free and fair elections yet? Okay. So, you may remember that this past Friday marked the 24th anniversary of the NATO airstrikes on Serbia. And so when that occurred in 1999, March 24th, I should mention it was against a vote in our own US Congress. It was against the UN Security Council. It was against really the mandate of NATO. It was against the War Powers Resolution of 1973 that Biden was a co-sponsor on. And I don't think he went senile until much later. So really he had no excuse to go against the own bill. So even against all this, Clinton went ahead and did it. But then a month later, the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, they declared the military action in violation of the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution. Okay, information you could have brought up a month ago, but fine. On April 28th, Congress again took a vote, again rejected further airstrikes. So surely this was the moment when Biden was going to reaffirm the central role of democratic institutions in delivering prosperity and liberty, right? Ha! No. Biden said, Bill, this is going great. Forget these politicians, forget the UN, forget Yugoslavia. We need to show them socialism doesn't fly. Managing your resources doesn't fly. We're going to take this over. We're going to carve them up. We're going to build a big military base there. We're going to control Kosovo's mineral resources, this, that, and the other. And that's what they did. And for 44 more days, including the use of internationally banned cluster munitions, including the use of internationally banned depleted uranium weapons, they continued to bomb. Biden saying the U.S. had to make clear our ability to secure our interests anywhere in the world. To the 120 leaders that are invited to this upcoming summit, our interests do not speak for the American people. They certainly don't speak for anyone in the room. Hopefully that goes without saying. These military actions against Yugoslavia flew in the face not only of the UN Charter, but of the War Powers Act of the Constitution. And I'll mention briefly that the War Powers Act specifically states war is only to be used to repel an armed attack against the U.S. or to repel an armed attack against the armed forces of the United States located outside of the United States, or to protect while evacuating citizens of the United States. I don't remember any evacuation, and I know the borders of the Balkan countries have seen a lot of changes over the years, but I'm pretty sure that they were never actually located in the U.S. or adjacent to the U.S. So I'll just mention that. So what do we have here? Has Biden reaffirmed the central role of democratic institutions in Yugoslavia? Has he delivered prosperity and liberty? No. Has he supported free and independent media? No. NATO targeted journalists, targeted civilian journalists at radio and TV stations, had them shut down and bombed. Civilian journalists died in this war. That is Biden's democracy. That is the promise of this so-called Summit of Democracy. And meanwhile, what's going on here in the United States? Biden won't go to the mat at all for the policies he supposedly supports that could help American people. He will die to drop bombs on any other country. He will go to the mat. He will be up there. He will be getting angry. He will be making backroom deals. But here in the United States, when it comes to helping working people, well, the parliamentarian, I got to reach across the aisle, wouldn't be democratic to, sign an executive order that could cancel student debt or use the executive powers of the ACA to give people health care. It wouldn't be democratic. You don't want to do something like that. Might be illegal and immoral to do something like that would actually help American people. So here's my message briefly in closing to the leaders, these 120 leaders that are invited here, to the leaders of South Korea, of Zambia, Netherlands, Costa Rica. And, I recently found out that Bosnia-Herzegovina was actually invited to this summit. Bosnia, I'm not sure that Joe Biden's democracy worked out that well for you 30 years ago. So eyes open. I would encourage all these leaders and the citizens of their country to reject this summit, and I ask my fellow Americans to join us here at the Center for Political Innovation in roundly calling out the hypocrisy of this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent. Awesome. Great talk from my brother Jonathan.